Hello everyone, my name is El Parnaso, and for today's video I'm gonna show you side patterns with Yami Fiensmith going second. So don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and share the channel with your people so we can grow. Now, the first thing that I want to discuss is which cards usually you'll take whenever you know you go second. So let's talk about it. First, a brief understanding of the Yami cards. You need to remember that yes, they are one card combos, but when you are going second, they can also fulfill the role of being board breakers because of what a single Yami card resolving will imply and how having two different Yami names or even two same Yami names will help you to break boards whenever you are trying to do it, right? So when you are making your side deck, I will advise you first to not take that many Yami names. However, if you are in a position of needing to take them, most likely you will have to choose between Cookie or the Lollipop. Why? Because Marshmallow is a special summon by itself, and Cupsy means two different Yami cards itself and whatever is adding. So you will need to decide whether or these two, or if you are or one copy of each, depending on you needing actually a lot of hand traps because of how overpowered your opponent is. Like, let's say that you are facing a Lunalight deck. It won't matter that much if you have two Yami names if they achieve the actual Liger Dancer, right? And etc. So for now, let's say that you are taking just one. And the one that you are taking, it will depend on the matchup too. Like, for example, if you are facing Mitsurugi, you will rather have more lollipops than cookies, so you will take in the cookie. If you are facing, for example, etc. deck, when you value the pop more than messing with your opponent's graveyard as a push, you will rather have the cookie. Now, let's say just for the purpose of the example, you're taking this one. The other card but however, regardless of the discussion, whenever you know you're going second, I would advise you at least to take one Yami card, one Yami monster, one of the normal summons. Now, when it comes to your extenders that are not Yami cards, I wouldn't advise you to take any of the Fiensmith cards because they also fulfill the role of being board breakers, even even allowing you to be in a position when you don't need to push with the Yami cards or compromising your normal summon for the purpose of breaking the board. I know that Luri and Lacrima kind of sucks because they can be normal summons too, but they will allow to your Yamis to be a special summon via the Requiem or the eventual Camellia with the Kagari. And if you draw any of these, the Marshmallow for example, you still will have a way to push with your Yami monsters whenever your Fiensmith card don't resolve, because of how the format is today. Like, you are not going to face, for example, that many mirror matches, so your opponent's disruptions are not going to be setting your monsters. It will be banishing your monsters, it will be Raigeking your monsters, it will be making an individual pop, etc. Because the cards that you are thinking now is not the cookie Yami way of your opponent. Is their Murakumos, their Falling at the Virtus, their Ecclesia to special summon Falling of Alba's OG, etc. Right? So don't take the Fiensmith cards, which leave us with the options of Hornetrons or the Engage. Camellia is going to be a lot more summonable as a push and as a way to play the game, going second than going first. So if you are going to take one of these, you are taking most of the time the Engage, because at the end of the day, what you care about is the Hornetrons, and only the Hornetrons is what allows Camellia to be a bridge and what allows Camellia to just be a Link 1 and a level 1 monster. So technically you don't need the Engage. So now here you have, in general, two spaces when it comes to your engine whenever you need to side out cards going second. When it comes to the bricks, I wouldn't advise you to never take any of them. You can make the argument to take the Akruki in very specific scenarios, but it's so specific that I wouldn't advise you to do that. as a general summary of your expectations with the deck in these scenarios, side decking going second. So let's go now with the non-engine. When it comes to the non-engine, a generic approach most likely will be taking out the Call by the Grave and taking out the Crossout Designator. Remember that what you care the most when it comes to cards like Call by the Grave and Crossout Designator is not to kind of push against your opponent's board, but to allow yourself to play the game whenever you are developing your combo. And the main reason these two cards will be here is because you have 2 extra copies to negate Mulcharmy Fuwalos, which is a huge problem for the deck, right? As any deck with Fiendsmith cards will have against this Mulcharmy. So if you are going second, like you are not thinking about the possibility of getting Fuwa anymore. So these cards need to be valued more as a board breakers than as jokers. Because yes, you can still get hand trap, but going second, you have ways to try to make those exchange unfair at your advantage. So that is why we are considering these two. Call by the Grave is not as good as a board breaker for in different matchups or in general. So you are taking out it with you and the crossout, which you are not doing with cards like Forbidden Droplet or Triple Tactical Talents in general. Like obviously this is going to depend in the scenario, but as a template, you can have these 4 cards to as side patterns when you know that you're going second. Remember that it will be either the lollipop or the cookie. But let's say that, and now that you have this, whenever you are building your side deck, you can have this idea of how many cards you are going to put as a template against different decks. Because something that you can do when you build your side deck is to try to put 10 different cards that you are thinking that are excellent against, I don't know, Kultung or Branded or blah, blah, blah. Because you need to ask yourself first this question: how many cards as a template I'm willing to take from my deck in order to side deck going second? Now, you see that these are 4 cards. However, then after making this generic approach and having a brief idea of how many cards you want for different matchups, like in this case 4, then you need to make yourself the question of how to interact with the specific deck that you are expecting or the deck that you are dealing in that specific moment. So just so you can see how this can variate, let's say like you are facing a pure Mitsurugi. If you are facing a pure Mitsurugi and like let's say that you won first single, now you know that you are going second, right? So first we follow the template, and in the case of going against Mitsurugi, you value more having the Lollipop Yami, because even if you push as a normal summon with the Lollipop Yami, you can target the Murakumo in the graveyard and force the prayers ever since the beginning. And if you're forcing that prayers right there, most likely your opponent will use the Raigeki, because after that there are not so many ways that they can revive the tribute the Murakumo again. Like they tribute the Murakumo on your turn. Like they may have, I don't know, like Mitsurugi Purification and blah blah blah, right? But those are more specific scenarios that needs to be valued in the sense that you will also have 5 cards in your hand, right? So even then you are forcing the prayers, and then you will, if they decide to not use the Raigeki effect, they will need to use the trap card to negate something to have that Raigeki and resolution only. So it's still a tough spot for your opponent. So we take the cookie. We are still taking the engage. The engage is most likely the biggest template of all of these side patterns, because almost always you are going to take the engage. Then, because now you know that it's a Mitsurugi deck, you understand that Call by the Grave is a very high quality board breaker. The crossout is still not that valuable against that deck, and almost always won't be that valuable when you go second. So you are still taking it out. How I will say that maybe the droplets won't be good against that deck, because if you draw the droplet, most likely you won't draw a hand trap or a card to play because it's droplet. So The droplet exposes yourself to lose cards against a deck that can make you discard another card because of the Murakumo. And decks like Jamie Fiensmith works a lot when it comes to taking advantage of every single card because of how consistent it is. The problem with its consistency is that they really need those cards that they drew to actually do something without having to risk other cards too much. So if you, also another thing that you need to consider is that the forbidden droplet most likely will be negated by purification, because you almost never will be in a scenario when what you want to do is to cause a trap card with the forbidden droplet. So here you can see now that by at least this logic, you don't have 4 spaces, you have 5 spaces. And then you need to ask yourself, so you can see how we are making first a generic template, so you can have a brief idea of how many cards you need to put in your side deck against different decks, so you don't overwhelm yourself. And then you ask the specific question of, okay, what decks are I'm expecting and what will I do against those decks? Like using the Mitsurugi as an example, we can see that we may have 6 spaces instead of just 4, because the Ghost Ogre won't be, it's almost useless against pure Mitsurugi, right? Worse if they shifter you, because you know how it is. So now we have 6 spaces, and after you make this generic template and then you make your specific templates with when it comes to what you are expecting, the third thing that you will need to do is see how many cards you are actually wanting to put against that deck that you are expecting. Continuing the example of the Mitsurugi, even though we have 6 spaces here, we are actually wanting to put more cards than just that. Why? Because if we go with Ghost Bell, which obviously we want, in this case we have the DD Crows, which we obviously want, we have the Droll Lockbears, which we also want. Here we have already 5 cards. Then we obviously want the Feather Duster. And here you can say that we have already the Perfect Exchange, right? However, there are still cards that you may be interested in putting in your deck, like for example the Lightning Storms. So here you need to put yourself in a position of what other cards that you already have that in your main deck that may be good against Mitsurugi, the specific deck that you are approaching, are more valuable than drawing instead of the Lightning Storm that card. And when you are making this specific question against the Mitsurugi matchup, you need to ask yourself 2 different questions. Is my opponent, the Mitsurugi opponent, playing with cards that risk a lot more their normal summon play? Or my opponent is focusing on the Habakiri and making the Habakiri? Or simply they are not playing that many normal summons, like maybe just 1 Aramasa, so some shit like that. But why this question is important? Because there are Mitsurugis that will focus on Manju and Senju, cards that can actually be more consistent for Mitsurugi, a deck that needs consistency, but put themselves in the position of getting hand trapped by other cards, by hand traps that may not be as good without those cards in their deck. So here you will need to put yourself in the position of what card you are wanting to take. You want to take the Infinite Impermanence, or you want to take the Mulcharmy Fugados. You can even make the argument to just take the talents. But here, because now you just want to put 2 more cards, what I will say, like let's say that you didn't see any kind of Senju Manju, in those cases you can just take the Mulcharmy Fugados, because the Mitsurugi pure matchup most likely can just summon once from the deck by the Habakiri, and then will never do it again, because thanks to being pure, they can just use their Mitsurugi ritual, send the Murakumo will add the mirror, and then they can play a special summoning from the graveyard instead of anywhere else. So, and they will still end on the Murakumo with the prayers as a minimum. So you are valuing more the Lightning Storms than the Mulchami Fugados in those scenarios. So here you have the exchange right here. But if you do that, because you in this build, you were playing just 2 Lightning Storms, then you need to ask yourself what I'm going to do with this Tir Fuga, or maybe this, or in the case that you are taking the impermanence, like the problem is solved because you can just play 1 impermanence. At least it's more ideal than playing just 1 Fuga, right? So here you can make now the decision of either playing of taking back the Yami, because yes, it's a normal summon, but just 1 Yami will force um, one of their biggest problems against the deck, which is the Raigeki. Because if they risk this cookie to become a Snatchy, because Snatchy is a summon effect to put the field spell, they will put themselves in the position of now using the Raigeki will guarantee a Capsi from the deck or any other Yami whatsoever. So at that point, what you are actually doing with that Raigeki, right? But if you put them in that position of Raigeking your normal summon, then they are risking that you have a Marshmallow in your hand. They are risking that you have an Engraver or a Tract. So the quality of a Yami monster, even going second against Mitsurugi, is really good. So you can make just this. Or, as I said, if you are seeing that your opponent is crazy, they like to, like they just don't play the Sanyo de Mayus, you can just go like this. Like, it's going to depend of how you are seeing your opponent playing their Mitsurugi decks, because there are people that would rather just focus on Murakumo Prayers and Trap, or then others, like, they just love to special summon them from the deck a lot because they are kind of reckless or whatever. But you identifying this can put yourself in those scenarios. So I just wanted to show you that, like the 3 steps of how to go to play Yami going second when it comes to your side patterns. Again, first, the generic approach of what kind of cards you are taking. In this case, usually will be 4, these 4. Then make yourself the specific question to see how much of these 4 will be applied, or how much of the other possible 4 forms, 4 cards, will be the actual exchangeable ones. We saw, for example, that a hand trap as Ghost Ogre can be exchanged too if it's just worthless, right? And then you just build your side deck accordingly when it comes to now you identifying what cards you need to take and how many cards you actually want to put, and when it comes to what decks you are expecting. In my case, I was really expecting a lot of Mitsurugis for my nationals, and that is the example that I just wanted to share with you. Like, you can just do this same exercise again, generic approach of template the cards that you are going to take when you go second, the specific approach to apply this generic template and adapt it to that specific scenario, and then if that space will be, if that second exercise gives you enough space for the cards that you want to put against that specific matchup that you are expecting. So if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe, and share the channel with your people. Bye bye.